Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to spend some time in Romans chapter 8. Don't know exactly how many weeks. I determined that we were going to get past an introduction to the first in the series, Groans, and then once I started to break it down, decided we need one more week. So today it's going to be, we're going to look at faith waits, and then we're going to look at faith that waits. It groans, prays, trusts, and grieves, and we might end up with a few more weeks as we, depending on how fast I want us to go through this. As we come into the middle of the 8th chapter of the book of Romans, though, the sound of groaning is in the air. The groaning is associated with childbirth, of all things, and within the earshot of the pain associated with delivery, we learn about a faith that waits. What it says in your worship folder, there's a sheet, actually there's a couple of sheets, one with some texts and the notes for this morning. There's also an article from Base for Grace that I'm not going to read this morning, but I wanted to include. It has some of the text, and so it would be a way for you to kind of recapture some of the points that we'll cover this morning. So, but look at what it says in Romans chapter 8, verses 22 through 25. Paul writes, "We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth, right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved. But hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what he already has? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently." It says the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. The universe is groaning in labor, and the sons and daughters of God are being delivered. Not just creation groaning, but Christians groan as well. It says, not only so, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. The creation groans in labor pains. Christians groan in labor pains, and it's in the context of the groaning of labor that we learn about a faith that waits. The groaning is related to the birthing process. The birthing process has commenced, and the groaning is about wanting the baby to be delivered so that the process can be over. Now, probably won't surprise you, I've never given birth. So I'm not going to claim to understand, but some of you understand what groaning is about. When the birthing process has commenced, and you want the birthing process to be over, so that the pain can be finished, so that the pain can be over. And so what we're to understand, painful groaning is being expressed by the creation and by Christians. The groaning reflects, and this is a graphic image, but one that I think might help us, partial birth status. Partial birth status. The sons and daughters of God are already and yet not yet delivered in and out of the birth canal. And the groaning is about wanting for the child to be delivered, for the birth to be complete, for the process to be over, for the sons and daughters to be delivered so that the groaning can cease. It talks about the first fruits of the Spirit. First fruits, there's a couple plantings in Israel. And so during the course of a year, they plant not once but twice. They have a spring planting that is harvested in early summer, and then they have a late summer planting that's harvested in the fall. And so the first planting, when you reap that crop is called the first fruits. And it's pretty important because if the crop comes up and if the first fruits come up, you can be pretty confident that the second planting is going to be successful as well. Now, that makes sense, barring weather irregularities. If you use the same seed and put the seed in the same soil, as long as weather cooperates, you're going to get another harvest if you had a first one. The first fruits gives you confidence in successive harvests. That's the way it works. But what does it mean in the context? What does first fruits mean? It could mean a couple of things. But it's describing not plants coming out of the soil, but it's describing what happens with Christians. The first fruits of the Spirit has to do with God doing something, and on the basis of seeing him do one thing, we can trust him to do another thing. So the first fruits could be kind of a down payment of sorts. So the first fruits of the Spirit could be God gives us a measure of joy, a measure of love. It's the first fruits. We feel some joy. We feel some love. We feel some hope. And based on the fact that we experience some love, joy, and hope, we can trust that there's going to be the rest of what God provides for us. So we experience maybe 10% love, joy, and hope. It could mean that. It could also mean that the first fruits of the Spirit of God is that he causes our spirit to be made alive. Our spirit becomes alive. We end up having an understanding, a connection to God at the spirit level. But our bodies are not yet connected. And so the first fruits of the Spirit could be that he makes our spirit alive. And then subsequent to that, we can trust him to put this immortal spirit within an immortal body. And I think that's the sense of the text. I think that's what the first fruits means. First, it says, we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. We are spirits within bodies. When God makes our spirit alive, we have an immortal spirit. Now, if we have an immortal spirit, we hold that now within a mortal body. An immortal spirit within a mortal body. The immortal spirit is the first fruits, and if God makes my spirit alive, I can trust that at some point, when I die, and my body goes into the ground, that there's going to be another harvest when Jesus comes. My body is going to be raised from the ground as an immortal body, an immortal spirit, into an immortal body. And that's when the process will be over. That's when groaning stops. But on this side of being immortal spirits within immortal bodies, we have to experience partial birth status and the groaning that attends it. In the interim period between the delivery of our immortal spirit and the delivery of our immortal body, we're stuck in partial birth status, and as such, we need to exercise a faith that waits. We can't speed up this delivery. If a fetus is being born and the mother is groaning, you probably, if you've been in the delivery room, this is probably not something you want to say, husbands, if you're there. Could we hurry this up? I mean, I've got some place to be. I've got some things to do. If you value your life, you probably aren't going to say anything like that. Some of you have been on the receiving end of some very interesting discussions if you've been in the place with giving birth, and I've heard some very interesting groanings. You're not going to tell the mother to hurry up. You're not going to demand much of the fetus. This side of the birth process, with this, with this whole image, it applies to spiritual life. We are already and not yet delivered. We are immortal spirits within mortal bodies, and guess what? This side of being placed in an immortal body, we're going to groan. There's going to be things that are both true and not true. We will be both already connected and not yet connected, and we're going to have to exercise a patience. We're stuck between departure and arrival. Let's talk about departure faith. Let's talk about arrival faith. Departure faith. Part of groaning is related to departing. Part of the groaning is related to pushing. It's about pushing. It's about being pushed out. Being pushed out, it's about departure and exclusion. And it's uncomfortable for the fetus entering the birth canal. I bet you that doesn't feel real good. Going from a spacious womb into the birth canal, being restricted, cloistered, pushed, squeezed, that's probably not a good feeling. No wonder he comes out and gets the thing, gets whacked and cries. It's uncomfortable. Departure faith is faith that is exercised in the context of being excluded. Pressure can feel like different things. It can be represented by physical things, but there's also different kinds of pressure, different kinds of squeezings, different kinds of exclusions. Look what it says in Hebrews chapter 10. The writer of the letter of Hebrews describes the departure faith that the Jewish Christians had to exercise. Follow along with me, Hebrews chapter 10. He writes, remember those earlier days after you had received the light, when you stood your ground in a great contest in the face of suffering. Sometimes you were publicly exposed to insult and persecution. At other times you stood side by side with those who were so treated. You sympathized with those in prison and joyfully accepted the confiscation of your property, because you knew that you yourselves had better and lasting possessions. So do not throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded. You need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what he has promised. For in just a very little while, he who is coming will come and will not delay. But my righteous one will live by faith. For the first Jewish Christians, walking with Christ meant being pushed out of the good life. They were publicly exposed to insult and persecution. Ow, that hurts. Had to sympathize with those in prison and joyfully accepted the confiscation of their property. And at the beginning, they had energy to endure this for a period of time. If you go through a quick labor, that's easier than a protracted labor. A labor of hours and a labor of tens of hours are very different things. For the first Christians, initially, this was something that could be tolerated. They thought Jesus was coming back any minute now. But minutes turned to hours, and hours turned to days, and days turned to years, and years turned to decades. And they got tired of waiting. Tired of waiting. Tired of not being able to have the things that they want. Tired of living in a world that wasn't comfortable. Tired of living in a world that did not meet their needs, that did not fulfill their desires. Tired of being excluded. Tired of being pushed out. He writes, don't throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded. You need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what he has promised. Would you agree with me from that text? Doing the will of God requires perseverance. You will be placed in situations that you will not want to stay in and that you'll need to stay in. Places that you feel pushed out and you won't like the way it feels. It's not that God has abandoned you. It's the birthing process. And you're not delivered yet. The writer of Hebrews tells these weary Christians to live by faith. You know, when we hear about living by faith, when somebody talks about it, it usually involves connecting with God and being able to get what you want. I lived by faith, and I trusted God to give me this, and guess what? He gave it to me. I was glad that I had the faith to believe that. We usually associate faith with getting what we want. In the context of Hebrews, living by faith involves connecting with God in order not to get what you want. That's a different thing, isn't it? Connect with God not to get what you want, but to connect with God not to get what you want. Because guess what? You're not fully born yet. And you're not home yet. You're not delivered yet. And you live somewhere in between being pushed out and arriving at the place where the delivery will be over. Living by faith is about reluctant departures and about too often sad goodbyes. Faith is frequently portrayed as a kind of Christian currency that we use to get stuff from God. That's the way faith is talked about oftentimes. We're encouraged to accumulate faith through Bible reading, church attendance, prayer, and obedience, and then if you get this faith, then you could cash it in and get what you want. Testimonials of people who live by faith frequently feature individuals who leverage their belief to get healed or to get wealthy or to get things like that. It's not the context biblically of what it means when it says the righteous will live by faith. It comes from the book of Habakkuk. The book of Habakkuk, he's an Old Testament prophet, and the book that bears his name is really a peer into his prayer life. He talks to God, and the book of Habakkuk reflects his inquiries and God's answers. And so here's what he asks. Here's what Habakkuk says. Let me just read this. Listen to this. Habakkuk, looking around at a very immoral society, even Jewish society, says, "How long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen, or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrong?" So what he's saying, God, I'm tired of this. I don't want to live in this world. I am tired of living in the midst of violence and immorality. And so God answers him. I am raising up the Babylonians, that ruthless and impetuous people who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwelling places not their own. So Habakkuk says, I'm tired, and God says, okay, I'm going to raise up the Babylonians, and they're going to conquer the land. And Habakkuk said, maybe you didn't hear me. And here's what Habakkuk said, O Lord, you have appointed them to execute judgment. O rock, you have ordained them to punish. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrong. Why do you tolerate the treacherousness? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? He says, God, I'm not really sure I like that plan. You know, I don't like the stuff I look around and see. And then God says the Babylonians are going to come, and he goes, they're worse than we are. And this is what God says. Then the Lord replied, write down the revelation and make it plain. It awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. See, he is puffed up. His desires are not upright, but the righteous will live by his faith. Here's what it means. When it says the righteous will live by faith, in the context, it's about enduring something that's not going to feel good. It says God's saying, I am going to come. This will be completed, but in the interim time, there's going to be times of pain. And my righteous one will have to live by faith. You will have to grab onto promises as you have to hold in your hand stuff that you really don't want to hold in your hand. Pain. Some things that don't feel comfortable. Some things that don't seem to go along with the promises. You're going to have to hold these things in tension for a while. To live by faith means to live with tension. To live with unfulfilled desires and unmet needs. The righteous will live by faith. seems to indicate that the righteous won't be able to leverage connection that will allow them to remove hunger and other unwanted feelings. Living by faith is being confident of God's care in spite of uncomfortable feelings rather than because of comfortable feelings. I'm going to say that again. Living by faith means being comfortable and confident in God's care in spite of uncomfortable circumstances and feelings, not because of it. You're going to feel discomfort and yet grab the promise of God at the same time. That's what it means biblically to live by faith. It has to do with being pushed out of things, and being pushed out doesn't feel good. It has to do with departure. Also has to do with arrival. Look what it says. Hebrews chapter 11. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. And they admitted that they were aliens and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. It says, all these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. Notice, they did not receive the things promised. Here's my question, why? Why? We're told that if you have faith, you can receive the things God promises. So, why didn't they receive the things promised? Was there something wrong with their faith? Was there something wrong with their faith? How do you know? It says they were living by faith when they died. Their faith was intact. There was nothing wrong with their faith. They didn't receive the things promised, but their faith wasn't the problem. That's interesting. They did a couple of things, though, in the interim time. Things that associate a faith that waits. Faith that waits welcomes. Faith that waits welcomes. Look what it says. They welcomed the promises from a distance. They welcomed the promises from a distance. You ever pull into a terminal where you want to get someplace? You want to be able to disembark from the plane. Might have been a really long trip. I remember I did a trip once. Flew to China. And I was in the middle of, I think it was a 747, and it was the one with the 2 seats on the outside and the 5 seats in the middle. And I was stuck in the middle of that middle section with fairly robust people sitting on either side. And I don't think I moved for 10 hours. I don't think I did. I think, I got up once, and then I think I sat there for 10 hours. And I think that we weren't able to get out of the plane very quickly. So, you're pulling into Beijing International Airport, and these robust people on either side, and then you ever done the plane kind of taxis its way in? It's taking its sweet time, and we have to wait for that plane, and naturally we have to, and then you just want to get there. You just want to get there. I told you about the image of welcoming things from a distance. Logan International Airport used to be that you used to be able to go, if you were greeting people, pretty close to the gate where they disembark. Now with Homeland Security, you can't even go near the gate. You have to wait by the baggage claim. Used to be. You could get pretty close. Do you remember that, some of you who were around a while ago? You could, and I remember, you could get, I remember we at Logan International Airport, I think it was, I forget who it was. It might have been my brother. It might have been my brother who was flying in from someplace. So we went to the airport to get him, to greet him, and there was a glass partition, and there was the gate. We could see the gate. We could get that close. And so, we were kind of doing this, and we were doing one of these, and, everybody was kind of craning their neck, and saw him. And so, what do? We started to welcome him from a distance. And, like everybody else was doing, what these people did, God gave them promises. And they welcomed these promises from a distance. They saw them coming. This pain is going to be over pretty soon. We're going to be able to live in greater comfort and not to be excluded. And they were waiting for these promises. And they were still waiting when they died. They welcomed the promises from a distance. And on this side of the grave, they didn't get to meet them. They met them now. That's the image. Faith welcomes. Don't just welcome, faith admits. What it says, they admitted that they were aliens and strangers on earth. I spent a couple years in a family in China. And when you're in Beijing International Airport, it's very obvious you're not in America. And those of you who have traveled to different countries, when you're in terminals in a strange country, you understand that this is not your home. The language is strange. The people do not look familiar. You don't expect for people to be friendly. And yeah, they're friendly enough, but they don't know you. You're obviously a stranger. It's pretty clear. It's not hard to realize when you're in an international airport that you're an alien and a stranger, that you don't really belong. Strangely, this is, in a way, somewhat like living as a Christian on this side of eternity is something like living in Beijing International Airport. This is not our home. We are stuck somewhere between departure and arrival in a strange place, a place that we get some needs met. When you're in Beijing International Airport and somebody does something nice, it feels wonderful. You don't expect it. We tend to have high expectations of this world. We treat it as if it's home. And it isn't. We are stuck somewhere in between departure and arrival. And in lieu of that arrival, if you listen to yourself, you didn't know this was what it was about. If you put an ear, you know what you could hear if you listen inside, listen very carefully. Listen. That sound coming from within you. You hear it? Oh, you know what that is? Groaning. You know why you're groaning? You want to be home. That's what it is. And some of you said, Mike, I don't know that I feel that. It's what you've always felt. But you've blamed it on other people. You said the reason you're groaning is they did something wrong. The reason you're groaning is you did something wrong. It's natural to groan if you're not home. Certainly we can get God to turn this into home, can't we? Can't we? We have enough faith. Can't we get God to turn this world into our home? Can we? Absolutely not. Partial birth. That's what it seems to. Faith welcomes. I think it's harder for us. I think we have a vanishing capacity to deal with tension. In our world, there's so much choice that we have. Would you agree with me that the ability to have what we want makes it very difficult for us to tolerate not having what we want? Would you agree with me? Would you agree with me? I know we had a young woman stay with us who lived in China. She spent her last year, her senior year, living with us. And I talked to her at the end of that year and asked her, what was your year here like? She said, you know what? I couldn't do the things here that I was able to do in China that allowed me to feel more close to God there. And I said, what do you mean? There's too much choice here. There's too many things you can do, too many things you have to say no to. And the weight of choice made it difficult. She lived with a sense of turbulence. Choice is hard. We tend to believe, because we're able to order most things. Our Facebook page looks exactly like we want it to look. It has the people we want to invite. We have the resources to make our life pretty much what we want it to be, within reason. We can drive the car we want to have. We can live in the home we want to have. You know the thing we can't do? We're not as good at living with tension, unmet needs, and unfulfilled desires. Do you agree with me that these people, they welcomed, admitted, and they longed for a better country? They weren't afraid to admit that they were homeless. They weren't afraid to admit that they were homeless. They longed for a better country, their own. Therefore, God wasn't ashamed to be called their God. I want to suggest that in a way, we are homeless. Now, we have homes, but they're not our real home. And you know what a natural response to homelessness is? Grief. Grief. That sadness that you feel? We tend to believe as Christians that sad is bad and glad is good. Sad is bad, glad is good. I don't think that's true. I think sadness is a normal response to grief and homelessness. In fact, if there's not some sadness, then maybe this world is too much your home. We're not home yet. And grief is a natural response to homelessness. Might it be that the resentment that you feel, the remorse that you feel, that sense of why don't I have the life I want to have? Why do I experience the things I experience? Might that be misdiagnosed grief? You're blaming somebody for a problem that's not really a problem? You're not home yet. I tend to believe, we're stuck between departure and arrival. How can faith wait? We talked about what? That's what we're going to talk about in the upcoming weeks. How can faith wait? We're going to talk about at least 4 things, maybe more. Faith waits. It groans. It prays. It trusts. And it's either going to grieve or breathe. I haven't decided yet, and it might even do more things, but we're going to work our way through Romans chapter 8. Joe, come up. We're going to sing a closing song, and we're going to learn about how to exercise a faith that waits. Let me pray for us. Father, the place that we're in, you understand that we groan. You're not surprised by it. You understand it. Salvation is a 2-part process. Our spirit is saved first, then our body joins when you come back. Until that time, we're caught in partial birth status, caught between departure and arrival. You understand groaning is indicated. It doesn't bother you. Pray that we would be gentle with ourselves, that we would understand the state that we live in, already and not yet. Thanks for the promise of the finished process, that we will be immortal spirits within immortal bodies and spend eternity with you, and that will be a place in heaven where there is no sound of groaning. Thanks for that promise. In Jesus' name, amen.